Friends, even as the distinguished dignitaries on stage settle in, it's indeed my pleasure and privilege to welcome the chief guest for this particular session, Mr. Amitabh Kant. I would also like to welcome Rajan, who is the managing director of Sequoia India, Nilima, an old colleague, uh, and obviously all the esteemed guests who are present here on the ninth annual forum of PAFI. This session, and I know there was a question on G20 earlier in the previous session, but this is one where we'll be diving much deeper into G20 and beyond. And who better than a true visionary like Mr. Amitabh Kant, to look into the horizons and beyond the horizons. Uh, as we know, he's recently taken charge as the Sherpa of G20 for India. And this is a critical year for India because India assumes the presidency of G20 from the 1st of December later this year. Indeed, it will require all his ingenuity to be India's guiding light as India takes its rightful place in the Committee of Nations. So, hearty congratulations to you, and I'd like to thank you for personally gracing this occasion. We do realize that India's presidency of the G20 this year onwards, from the 1st of December, presents an enormous opportunity to set the global agenda for economic growth, geopolitical coordination, and we do believe this will serve humanity in the years to come. And obviously, there couldn't have been a more opportune year for this, given the fact that India is entering its Amrit Kal. India's plans for the G20 presidency will help set the course for India at 100, achieving scale, speed, sustainability, and all these will leapfrog India to the next level of technological advancement. We are seeing the digital transition, the green transition, and these will be key to the future growth for a world that it's really grappling with resource scarcity, environmental challenges. In fact, both for Meta and the rest of industry, we are keen to support India, keen to support the Sherpa. So, in this momentous year in the history of India, and we would like to explore opportunities of how industry and business can collaborate and partner with you in this crucial mission. And with these words, I would like to hand the mic over to Rajan to take the session ahead. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you, Mr. Kant, for agreeing to grace the occasion. Lots of excitement about G20. It's interesting. India obviously is taking over presidency at a rather interesting time in the world. Inflation in the developing world is pretty much at a 50-year high. 75 bips rate increase yesterday, probably another 2 or 3 rate increases to go. It is almost without question the US will go into a recession. And every economist seems to agree that it won't be a hard landing. So that's the developing world. The UK is in recession. We're at war in Europe. And China's growth rate's the lowest it's ever been. And that's just the beginning of it. Geopolitics are obviously at a very, very challenging place around the world. And in the midst of all of this, India is sort of, in many ways, we believe, still a shining light around the world. And we're in this extraordinary position of, taking over the presidency of G20 next year, or starting December 1st. And we'd love to maybe start, Mr. Kant, with getting your thoughts on what does this really mean, and what's the role that India can play in at least, many believe that 2022, actually that second half of 2022 is when the real global economic crisis, a lot of people believe, will begin to deepen, right now, and so it's going to be a very, very interesting time for India to be hosting, the G20 presidency. So maybe you can start off by saying what's the role that India can play in this geopolitically very challenging, economically unprecedented. It's funny to say unprecedented right after coming after COVID, but it's looking like that. What role will India play?
So Rajan, first and foremost, it's a very fractured world. I mean, there's a Russia-Ukraine conflict or war, or whatever you want to term it as. You have the China-Taiwan issue. You have, as you mentioned, the dollar will actually get very strengthened. There's a challenge of inflation, and therefore Feds will keep raising rate, and that means that other countries will keep getting impacted. So global supply chains are disrupted. There's a huge challenge of climate change. So growing without carbonizing the world will be a major challenge. And more than anything else, it's very important to understand that in the post-COVID world, a vast segment of the population around the world has got impacted on education, health, nutrition. So the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal Agenda of 2030, has actually not progressed, it's regressed. So all these are the key challenges before the world right now. And the major challenge is what is Indonesia is confronted with during its presidency. And that is that the G7 countries, they see the Russia-Ukraine war as an existential threat for themselves. They feel that their very national existence has got impacted. They feel, G20 is not an issue of war, is not a forum for discussing war and conflict. That's the United Nations. So United Nations Security Council should be discussing issues of war and conflict. So G20 is not the right forum, but when you talk to them, they say that the war has very severe implication in terms of energy, and therefore it has implication in terms of economics, it has implication in terms of finance, and they say the food crisis as a consequence of the war has very severe implication for the survival in very many parts of the world, and therefore energy and food security both have an implication, and therefore the spillovers of the war have very major implication in terms of both economics and finance. So there are very hard lines defined in Indonesia right now. The G7 doesn't even want to have a photo op with Russia, doesn't want a social gathering with Russia. So it's impossible. Indonesia has been struggling even to get a communique out of the several ministerial meetings that have been held. That is the nature of the global scenario which exists at this point of time.
So we can't expect any pictures coming out of Indonesia?
No. So, well, the important thing to say is that India should not be Indonesia. I mean, we should be. So first and foremost is that. So despite what's happening on, I think the challenge for India by the time India takes off presidency, the first and foremost challenge will be that there will be global recession, and we should face that reality. And therefore, the challenge before the world will be get growth center stage. That's number one. Number two is that there will have to be talk of climate action. And there has to be talk of climate action because the Western world, which had committed to climate finance in 2009 in Copenhagen, has not lived up to its commitment made during both at COP21 in Paris and COP26, that is about $100 billion flow per year. None of the developed countries have lived up to that commitment. That's number two. And secondly, I think whatever growth we talk about has to be in the context of sustainability. And the third key issue will have to be the issue of really accelerating the pace of sustainable development goals. Whatever was its 2030 agenda, how do we achieve it? And that has to be accelerated further. My view always has been that every crisis is actually an opportunity, and India should be very, very ambitious about it. Irrespective of the global geopolitical crisis, if you're not ambitious, if post-World War II the world wasn't ambitious, you would not have had a Marshall Plan, you would not have had post-Bretton Woods institutions, and I think there's also a need to think of a post-Bretton Woods 2.0. So there are huge opportunities rather than crises. Forget the crisis. This crisis should be seen by all of us as an opportunity to accelerate the pace of growth and lift people above poverty line and bring sustainability to the world. And that should be our ambition.
Got it. So basically bring growth back. And
bring growth center stage.
Bring growth center stage, address climate change, because every day that goes by, the world gets into a deeper soup, and make some real progress on the SDG goals. Yeah. Sounds like those are the three top of mind things.
That's what I feel. That's what the world needs right now.
No, absolutely. So let's maybe double click on some of these areas, Mr. Kant. So, one way to bring growth back is to accelerate digital transformation. India, fortunately, has led the world in every sense over the last 6-7 years on digital transformation, having 1.3 billion unique IDs, leading the way globally on payments. Now all kinds of new public digital infrastructure coming down the pike. Do you see next year and G20, particularly the forum, as a way to get the world to accelerate digital transformation? Specifically the way that India has, right? In many ways, India has done it in a way that no other country in the world has. In an extraordinarily inclusive way at what Nandan would call population scale. So any early thinking, Mr. Kant, on how maybe we could use G20 or India could use its presidency to catalyze at least 1/3 of the world, 3 or 4, let's say 4 billion people out of the 7.7 billion people, to accelerate digitization of these economies?
So Rajan, that's a very critical point that you've made, and I think what India has done is a unique story. I mean, it's a unique story in terms of digital identity, first of all, for every single Indian. And then every single Indian empowering them, that is consent-based movement forward as far as payments, etc. is concerned. And that means that the individual must be the owner of his data. And thirdly, really fast-tracking fast payments. And what India has achieved is some truly remarkable, that it has created these public platforms on the top of which we've allowed private sector to innovate and compete in the market space. So PhonePe competes with Google Pay, and WhatsApp competes with Paytm, and so on. Important thing to understand is that in India, 21 we've done about 48.6 billion transaction, which is about 3x of what China did, which is 7x of what USA, Canada, UK, and the entire Europe did. So that is the size and scale of what India has done. India has really created an alternative model as distinct from what the big tech model has done. And to our mind, this is the model which the rest of the world has to emulate and follow. And that would really mean that what India has done in last 5 to 6 years in terms of digitization, in terms of identification, is something, just look at, as a consequence of this, what has happened. I mean, the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, when we started off in 2015, only 19% of the accounts were for women. The latest figures which have just come in, 56% of the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan accounts are 56% are women. That is the transformation which has happened. And when the bank accounts were being opened, many people said that there won't be deposits, but all of them are flourishing with deposits, actually. So these have been transformational scheme. So what India has done in 5 to 6 years would have normally taken India 60 years. You've done in 6 years what would have taken India 60 years. And therefore, this is what is called really pole vaulting technologically. Huge pole vaulting technologically. When I was a young officer, it used to take me 9 months to, I was working in the traditional fisheries sector of Kerala, and my job was to improve the livelihoods, the lives of traditional fishermen. So I gave new fishing crafts, I gave outboard motors so that they could go much further into the sea. I gave them fishing nets, but opening their bank accounts used to take me 7 to 8 to 9 months running around bank managers and getting their know your customers. Today it takes digitally using your biometric, it takes less than a minute. So I've seen this transformation before my eyes in India. And that's the model. If you want to lift vast segments of population above poverty line, that is the pole vaulting you need to do across many continents. And that is the model which India has to put across to the rest of the world. And that is the India narrative which we'll try and put during the G20. The India narrative is about two things. One is the unique model of public digital goods. These are public digital platforms which India created, on the back of which private sector innovated. And that has been transformational. And the other unique story of India has been the unique story of startups in India. From the time we launched the startup movement, you've been associated with it. But that has been truly a transformational story. When we started the Startup India movement, there were just about a handful of startups, about 100 odd startups in India. Today, you have about close to 90,000 startups. You have about 107 unicorns. So that has been truly a great story of innovation, a great story of driving transformation by young innovators, which has been an exceptional story. And that is one of the engagement groups that we are thinking of, is a startup engagement group, which will be driven by our startups.
So we've heard that there's something called a Startup 20 that's being talked about. Mr. Khan, maybe you can share a little bit more.
So, the G20 is driven at several levels. One is, let me give you a little bit of a history of a G20. When G20 started, it was actually being driven because of financial crisis. They were being driven by, the 1998, 97, 98 financial crisis that led to the finance ministers of G7 countries. Finance ministers and central bank governors of G7 countries used to meet. Then, when the East Asian crisis came up, it was felt that this can't be handled by only the finance ministers. So it was elevated. This became a leaders' conference, and then the leaders felt that actually the crisis, East Asian crisis, is too big a crisis for just the G7 to handle. The other important point to understand is that if you were to look at the global GDP, the emerging markets GDP is growing, and the G7 GDP is actually declining. So you'll have if you were to look at the world in 2050, one study by PwC says that India will be the second biggest country in terms of the size of its economy. So the emerging markets will grow exponentially in the years to come. So any crisis that you have, it can't be solved without emerging markets. And that's how the G20 grew and evolved with 20 important players. And these G20 countries account for 85% of the global GDP. They account for about 78% of the global trade. They account for 2/3 of the population, and they account for about 92% of the global patents are held by these G20 countries. So it's the most powerful grouping, simply because UN is paralyzed. UN has become ineffective. It's too large, too unwieldy a body. G7 is too elitist a body, and G20 is just the right body to find a solution to crisis.
Got it. No, I think clearly we have a great opportunity here. I'll get back to startups in a bit, Mr. Khan. Building on the digital transformation, digital diplomacy and data governance is a very important topic, right? And globally, I think there's no data governance framework globally. Each nation is trying to develop their own data governance framework. Do you see an opportunity to use India's presidency and next year to try to develop a set of globally consistent, because the thing is, if you really want the entire world to accelerate digitally, right, you also want to do it in a way where you protect consumer rights, you protect national sovereignty and the rights of countries. It's important to have a consistent set of data governance, right? Is that something that you all are thinking about that could be possibly, use this forum as a way to develop these global set of, standards, rights, frameworks?
No, you're very right. So there are two critical things on that. One is about data governance world over, I think that's one challenge. The second challenge is about data empowerment to the individual citizens, and
Right.
that is consent-based transactions. And the third key issue to my mind is about how do you use data for development purposes. Because, I mean, I've seen this with my own eyes when I was implementing the aspirational districts, that real-time data can be used and can be very transformational in education, health, agriculture, and India has demonstrated that. So I think these are three clear areas where we need to do work. But my view on that is that trying to be transformational of bringing in a digital data governance may be a wee bit too ambitious for the world right now at this point of time. But building on the public digital good infrastructure which India has created is an India narrative by which you can transform the lives of people in Africa. And India should create an alternative model to what has been done in the past, and not merely in terms of big tech, but in terms of the infrastructure model of assisting other countries, what other countries have done. We should create an alternative of that, and saying that these are the digital payment, the CoWIN, what we did. We've just done the logistic platform where we've unified everybody. Many of these things can be put together in a box and put in a cloud and told to the world that this is the alternative which India has created for the developing countries of the world.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, I hear you on the data governance, Mr. Kant, and you're probably right. It's possibly too audacious, maybe, to try to address in this forum. But going back to your, the public digital infrastructure that India has built, what an extraordinary outcome from G20, our presidency in G20 would be. So let's say for 4 billion consumers around the world to benefit without question from all the infrastructure. Because the good thing is, I don't know how many of you know this, but it's all built on open source.
Yeah.
So theoretically, you could open it up and any country in the world
it's open
can
source
actually leverage this infrastructure. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing, right? I mean, it's actually literally 1,000 times more powerful than GPS.
Yeah.
Right? GPS, when it was invented, that's the reason all of you who took Uber, I don't think any of you did, but the next time you take Uber, the reason Uber works is because of GPS. So is that sort of the thing, how you're thinking about this?
So,
we agree to really roll it out?
Yeah. It's open source and it's interoperable.
That's right.
Yeah. India has the technical skills. India has demonstrated this, that it has delivered on the ground. It's created an alternative model. India is willing to assist all other countries. In fact, it's put it out in public domain on one of the sites which MyGov runs. The challenge is about rolling it out and saying that we want to do this. I think there's huge amount of political commitment to do it across the world. But the challenge is that different countries are, the local political leadership has to drive it in those countries. It's not feasible. We can put a target to it, but it will be very difficult for, India to say that I'm going to do it in a country which is administered somewhere else by the political leader.
India can't
You
do
need
it.
to
India
partner.
you need to
partner countries.
That's right.
You need to build alliances. You need to bring in a lot of civil society organizations. You need to bring in a number of startups. You need to bring in a lot of innovative companies to drive that movement forward in those respective countries. And India should be the intellectual leader to deliver that.
Actually, just a crazy idea, Mr. Kant, could be, as a nation, maybe we commit 100, we have 8 million developers in India, right? By 2025, we'll have the largest developer population in the world. Maybe we commit 100,000 developers for the next 3 years. For any country that wants to, quote unquote, digitize, in sort of the, let's not call it the India way, but the open way, maybe we commit 100,000 developers.
Yeah,
it's actually not that hard to do.
Yeah. So, Rajan, I'm very clear about one thing, that it will be very difficult to lift people above poverty line and to achieve the SDG goals without doing two things. One is without making the world go digital, because that will be transformational. And the only way the world will really grow at rapid pace and will be able to achieve its SDG goals is by going digital. And the second is to play a leadership role in climate action, I don't think it's a challenge, it's a huge opportunity for India, because valuation of countries and of companies will go up only with that. You'll be able to attract capital only with taking climate action. So both these are great positives for India, and both these should be brought center stage. What the vision will be, a lot of that will depend on the leadership of the Prime Minister who will be leading this.
Got it. Actually, so my last question, and then we're going to open it up. So if we can get some mics, and if you can put your hands up if you have questions. So I wanted to, my last question was really around climate change. Actually, they want you to use a cordless mic. Oh, you've got it. Okay, got it. Is around climate change, Mr. Kant. As you said, the world is getting, a scarier place by the day. All these commitments that every country has made have been missed. That's the reality. By and large, there have been a few countries that are exceptions. What can collectively G20 do differently next year? And what role can India play in a tangible way to make sure that we get on a path to net zero by 2050? Otherwise, by the way, we won't be having these. By 2050, PAFI is going to have to move to some other mountainous location, because we wouldn't be able to do this time of year. I mean, it's going to be too hot, and the air conditioning systems won't work. So
you'll have the PAFI in Kashmir.
Yeah, probably, or, probably.
Yeah. Okay, so climate action is critical. I think India must take the lead, as it has done. The Prime Minister, through his Panch Amrit in Glasgow, has spelled out a clear roadmap for India. And I think the important thing to understand is that India is not a country which has contributed to this.
That's correct. That's correct.
So first of all, at 1.5 degree centigrade, if you were to look at the world, the total carbon space available to the world is about 2,400 gigatons, out of which India has occupied only 1.5%. 52 gigatons, it's occupied 1.5%. It's logically entitled to about 18.5% based on its per capita population-wise, if you look at it. But India is therefore not a polluter. The carbon space has been occupied by all the developed world, and therefore they accepted the principle of climate justice, and they said that we will finance to support your transition. The second important point to understand is that the world can never achieve 1.5 degree without India achieving.
That's correct.
Important thing is that in the days to come, India will be industrializing. Without India taking climate action, it will not be possible for the world to achieve. So therefore, it's very important that India takes leadership. I personally think, I'm a very strong believer. I mean, from whatever the Prime Minister said, I am convinced in his leadership that for India, this is an opportunity. This is not a challenge, and there are two things to that. One is India is climatically blessed. Secondly, India's top-class entrepreneurship, and India has demonstrated this when it lived up to its COP21 commitment in Paris. It was the only country which achieved its non-fossil power commitment. It achieved it 9 years ahead of schedule. 9 years ahead of schedule. None of the G20 countries achieved it. India achieved it. Now the challenge is that electricity is only 20% of energy. 80% of the energy is hard to abate sectors like refineries, steel, cement, long distance transport, fertilizer. How do you decarbonize them? Because for India to be the first country, India will have to be the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing. Every other country has industrialized by carbonizing. India will have to be the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing. Now, what does India need to do? India needs to decarbonize all these sectors, and that can only be done by green hydrogen. And green hydrogen is about green renewable energy, cracking water and producing. Using electrolyzer to crack water and produce green hydrogen. So green hydrogen, India can be the world's production and technology hub because we produce renewable energy at low cost. We can become the center of the world in that, and that is what our ambition is, because the Prime Minister has also said that we should we should ensure that by 2047, when we become 100, we should not be importing fossil fuel. We should actually be an exporter of clean energy. And therefore, this is an opportunity for India to become the greatest producer of green hydrogen, produce it for your domestic market and export it to the rest of the world. And India is climatically blessed. The challenge is to get finance at low cost. And that the developing world is not providing. To my mind, it's very important that this opportunity is used to restructure the existing multilateral financing institutions. World Bank and IMF, which were designed for the post-Bretton Woods period, do direct lending. And instead of direct lending, they should be used for credit enhancement. They should be used for blended finance. They should be used for first loss guarantees so that they can do 100x more financing. And they should be turned into institutions only for climate change and SDG financing.
I like the idea, actually. I mean, I think both of those. One is the ambition to be a net exporter of energy based on green hydrogen and other clean energy sources, and also creating new financial institutions that can enable all of this. All right, so with that, let's open it up for a few questions. I think the first hand went up back there. Let's give that gentleman. Please make this question very specific and brief.
Sure, sir. My name is Vikrant. I'm from COAI, and my question is, although we have taken a leap from non-alignment to the multi-alignment, keeping India's development at the core, and we are seeing India at 100, 2047. What areas or sector India should focus on, considering to grow sustainably and having the presumption that most of the rare earth metal or natural resources, cobalt, nickel, lithium, are being dominated by China or Chinese controlled company? And apart from, you already mentioned that India should be a net exporter of hydrogen. What other renewables energy should India focus on?
Yeah, so first of all, let me tell you that as far as climatic conditions are concerned, India does not face any challenge from China. In renewable energy, India doesn't face any competition from anywhere in the world except the Middle East. Now, the Middle East is already fossil fuel rich. So the challenge is that it's an opportunity for India to become the biggest renewable producer. Yesterday, the PLI for solar was announced, 19,500 crores. Become the biggest manufacturer for solar, and then use that to produce green hydrogen and decarbonize other sectors. Also on batteries, storage, which you talked about, let me also tell you that if you were to do cells and packs, you would capture 82% of the total value addition in India. And nickel, cobalt, and all this is just about 18% of the value in a battery cell. So I think the important thing is that when we push the PLI for battery, advanced chemistry cell battery manufacturing, we put it out for 50 gigawatts. The offers which came in were for 130 gigawatts from across the world and from leading Indian companies. So there's a huge opportunity for battery storage manufacturing in India, for two-wheelers, for electric storage, for three-wheelers. India should become the center for compact car manufacturing and electric compact car manufacturing. We should become the center for two-wheelers, three-wheelers, electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and export to the rest of the world. If you don't do this, this will be a lost opportunity.
Yeah. Here, and then we'll go to you. Can we get the mic there? Sorry, okay. Just give it to... Yeah, go ahead.
I have a solitary question from my old reverend friend Amitav, preceded by a very brief remark. See, Winston Churchill conceived the concept of an unwritten alliance. And Winston Churchill conceived of a concept of unwritten alliance between the United States and Britain, where the two countries could walk in dignity and majesty. India had a kind of unwritten alliance when we were stabbed behind our back by China in 1962, on the 20th of October 1962, when the Americans almost sent their aircraft from Philippines. The Kitty Hawk aircraft carrier came, and the nuclear threat by McNamara and so on. The Brazilians had an unwritten alliance with the Americans at some point of time. Now, my question is, within the syndrome of the G20, do you, Amita, visualize any unwritten alliances that India may forge? In other words, an invisible alliance within a visible alliance, not necessarily a military unwritten alliance. It could be an unwritten alliance, digital alliance, or a clean energy alliance. Now, within this whole G20 system, can you identify, or do you feel that India needs to have its own unwritten alliances with some of the constituents of the G20?
So, India works in several partnerships. India has several partnerships. You have the Quad, you have the BIMSTEC. All these are actually alliances. So Quad works on many of these areas. And PM had just gone to Uzbekistan for the SCO meeting. So India works on several partnerships. But within G20, I don't think we should have a grouping. We should try and take everybody along. We should be when you're a host, you should be neutral. You should not build groupings and start breaking up. We should be a leader in taking everybody along. We are talking about growth. We are talking about sustainability. We are talking about lifting people above poverty line. We are talking about digital public infrastructure. We are talking about all these areas where the whole world needs them. And we should be a neutral leader for everyone in this area when we are hosting the event. No groupings in G20.
Taking a cue from what you said about the space between G7's own interests and the multilateral institutions, not just the United Nations, lack of action in certain areas. What, in your view, and how we could achieve India's leadership in those areas which really matter for G20? You mentioned climate change. We've heard about that. What about health equity? And the reason is that we saw a lot of issues, and I come from health sector, even in the ACT accelerator when we tried for vaccine equity. Now, this is an opportunity which, like you've just mentioned, one of the areas, do you think India would be able to grab this leadership in areas of, say, diagnostics, global therapeutics, bring equity to G20 countries? And if we can, how?
Yeah, so the other thing I want to point out is that, G20 is a continuous process. It's important to understand this. And one of the big things which, every year you have a new president. So G20 moves from country to country, you have a new leader. But India has left a huge imprint on G20 by several things that it has done on health front. During the Saudi presidency, the peak of the COVID, India took the leadership and worked in partnership with Saudi for two things. One is it worked for debt relief for all the less developed countries in a very big way. And secondly, it worked on this forum for health where resources are being put in by all countries so that the next pandemic, whenever it comes, and that fund will be housed in World Bank, so that the next, and India is a contributor to that. So it's an ongoing work which is being done, but there's a health working group. Every working group has its own agenda. There's a huge opportunity for the advantage on the Sherpa track is that when you have meetings here, the Sherpa track will be led by our own Ministry of Health, and the health group, and that will feed into the Sherpa track. So whatever leadership, whatever India narrative they want to build in, but it's important to understand that you have to take all countries along, and therefore whatever they come up with, any unique initiative on therapeutics, vaccination, many other things that they come up, we'll be very happy to take it forward.
Hi, Mr. Khan, my name is Akanksha Jha. I'm from Indian School of Public Policy, and my question is around the SDGs. You mentioned that it plays a key role. However, given that SDGs just provide a framework, for the goal to be achieved without having a strong reporting system around it, how do you suggest that us as policy practitioners work our way around it to make sure that we're able to achieve that goal in the coming years?
Yeah, it's a framework, but no other country provides you the model to do it, the size and scale to do it. I mean, we've done about in the last 6 years, we've done 3 crore houses. That's like building an entire Canada. We provided 8.1 crore water connection through the Jal Jeevan mission. That's like providing water connection to the entire Brazil. We've done 50,000 kilometers of roads. That's like providing road through entire Europe. Entire Europe is we've connected by roads. We don't understand in India, we don't understand the size and scale of the dimension of what we've done. So when we talk about 48.6 billion digital transactions, that's 7x of what US, Europe, and UK have done, and 3x of what China has done in digital payments. We don't, sitting in India, we don't realize what we have achieved in the last 6-7 years in terms of the sheer size and scale of the transformation. What are these? This is all achieving SDG goals. You're providing housing, you're providing water, you're providing access of roads, you're providing digital transactions and to be able to leapfrog. This is SDGs. That's the model which India has built up. None of these countries have been able to do it, what India has done.
Lots of opportunity to have impact. Okay, any other questions? There's one question back there, and then we'll just take the last two. There's one, can we get a mic over there? And then also let's get a mic over here. Last two questions.
Yeah, good evening all. So myself with Surana. One question ahead actually, with the increase in EVs, what is the current state of the infrastructure?
You have to hold the mic closer to your...
Sorry. What is the current state of infrastructure in handling the decomposition of batteries in the upcoming years? With the increase on EVs, Fiat in the roads, I would say, in upcoming years, I think a lot of waste would be there in terms of replacement of batteries and the other things. Yeah. So do we have any sound infrastructure in tackling this for the same?
Yeah, go ahead. Recycling of batteries, infrastructure for recycling of batteries as EVs grows.
That's a very, very important question and a very good question of that. And I'm very happy that there are quite a few startups run by IIT Roorkee students who've done some amazing work on recycling of lithium batteries. So the number of startups, and that's a huge business opportunity. If you are a young entrepreneur, instead of asking this question, please do start a startup. You know, that's the biggest opportunity in India to recycle all these lithium batteries, because in the days to come, you'll have huge amount of batteries around the country, both on the mobility side, on the electric storage side, and on the mobile telephony side. So that's a massive business opportunity. And I'm glad that there are several startups who've started working on this in a big way.
Okay, let's take the last question.
Okay. Sir, I am Adrish, a policy scholar. Sir, nearly more than 2 decades ago, India achieved double-digit GDP figures. Now we are having a visionary Prime Minister, Sthir Sarkar. What is stopping India INC from reinvesting heavily to achieve double-digit GDP once again?
No, again, important question. See, India has grown at high rates. India has grown at 8 to 9% for 5 to 6 years in the past. But it's important to understand that you're in a globalized world. In a globalized world, if there are challenges of global debt, if there are challenges of global inflation, if there is a challenge of the Fed raising rates across, it has huge implication on a country like India. And therefore, if the global supply chains are impacted and you're not able to get input into products which you're going to export, then you're going to get impacted. So when the world was growing at high rates, and you must understand this, that when USA and Europe and when China were growing, global debt was rising. So you could grow on the back of debt. There was global supply chains were growing and expanding in a very big way. And climate change was not they could grow by polluting the world. When India's chance to grow has begun, we are just at the beginning of that process. Global debt is getting sucked out. export supply chains and global supply chains are broken, and you are being forced to be the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing. So these are the challenges. But irrespective of the challenges, we should treat these challenges as an opportunity. We should accelerate the pace of our reforms. We should urbanize in a sustainable manner. We should bring in greater efficiency into our competitive efficiency into our manufacturing, become a top-class producer, and our private sector should be the world champion, and we should provide even greater impetus to our startup movement. We should have the ambition, as the Prime Minister said, that we'll transform India in one generation. So that should be our ambition.
It's a great one. Last question from me, Mr. Kant. We have a esteemed group here. These are leaders of public policy for some of the largest companies in India. We have lots of young minds here who hopefully are going to get into the field of public policy as they look at the next 12 months or so, leading up to this momentous 3 days that India is going to host under your leadership. What can we all do to help India's presidency for G20?
So keep working in partnership. I'm a great believer in partnership. I'm a great believer that whatever success we achieve is working in close participation with our private sector. We'll continue to work in partnership with you and continue to give us great ideas, continue to tell us how to succeed. We'll keep getting inspired from you.
Great. On that, you wanted to thank Mr. Kant. Mr. Kant, thank you. By the way, Mr. Kant, there was Incredible India, there was Startup India, there was many other movements, and we can't wait for the G20 India moment from Mr. Amitabh Kant. So we're waiting for that.
So on behalf of PAFI, this is really my privilege to propose vote of thanks. But before I do, of course, here we were talking about G20, and it's really a great and a proud moment for all of us that India is going to assume presidency, and that too under leadership of Mr. Kant, and who is known to really drive so many campaigns, whether it's Make in India, Startup India, Incredible India, and many more such campaigns. So we are really rest assured that even our G20 opportunity as a president, as a presidency of this, I think we are really going to use this, showcase all our initiatives, which we just talked about. And thank you, sir, for your valuable insight. Especially, you talked about bringing growth center stage and addressing climate actions and the SDG goals. And under SDG, of course, health, food, and energy security are the 3 key pillars. Since I come from healthcare, so I just wanted to use this opportunity to also, in fact, mention that I think we should use this opportunity as G20 president to really bring health equity, which my colleague also talked about, equitable health, and especially for NCDs. Because the disease burden for non-communicable disease, the way it is going up, I think it's high time, and especially not only for India, but for other G20 nations. I think having innovative, sustainable healthcare financing to reduce the burden and provide equitable access to healthcare should be one of the key things in our G20 agenda for 2023. And with this, I thank you once again. Thank you very much. And I now request Rajiv sir to hand over a small token of appreciation to sir. And also wanted to just say that our next session is going to start soon, so please stay here, don't go away.